let's say that Nikki Haley happened to run a very strong second in the New Hampshire primary, which is what we're looking at right now. Then the next state that comes up in the Republican side is South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was governor. Now, if Nikki Haley then runs strongly in South Carolina, her home state, then all of a sudden the media narrative could be, well, we've got a horse race here. We didn't expect that. And all of a sudden, it's no longer that Trump sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Now, Donald Trump can head into 2024 feeling, well, pretty confident, still leading the polls to become the Republican candidate. However, fellow Republican Nikki Haley has enjoyed a surge in polling ahead of the New Hampshire primary. Well, let's look ahead at what this means for next year's US presidential election with Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin's Clinton Institute, Scott Lucas. Good morning, Scott.
Very good morning to you.
Presumably there's a lot hanging over Donald Trump's head. It's going to be a difficult year before he even gets to the presidential election. But would you agree with the assessment? He's probably pretty happy heading into Christmas right now.
No, I wouldn't say that, because Donald Trump is never, ever really a very happy person. All you have to do is read his Truth Social feed and his all caps messages to find that out. But I think more broadly, I don't start off agreeing with that, because that risk being led by the nose by Trump's narrative. And if you're led by the nose by Trump's narrative, which a lot of the U.S. media is, you don't have what is a proper campaign for one of the most important offices in the world. And by that, I mean, Donald Trump is not the only candidate in the Republican race. There are 4 or 5 others who still are fighting to go to Iowa, which is the first caucus, and then New Hampshire, the first primary. And as you just noted, one of those other candidates, Nikki Haley, is closing ground quite rapidly on Trump. Now, this doesn't mean that Nikki Haley is going to be the Republican nominee, but it does mean that there is more than one candidate in the race. And I think even more importantly, that rather than just focusing on Trump, the personality, through 2024, be it for the Republican primary or the general election, the responsibility of you and me, as analysts and as journalists, is to focus on the issues. Because I think this is the most serious campaign in terms of what it means for the United States and for the world since the American Civil War of 1865. And I'm not saying that just to grab a soundbite. When you look not only at the question of the attempted coup in 2021, the question of the American system itself, but when you look at education, healthcare, immigration, the economy, foreign policy issues, such as the Middle East or such as Russia's aggression on Ukraine, you need a responsible, competent person in the White House. And to simply just say, oh my gosh, what did Donald Trump just say? That's not actually covering the issues that will affect Americans on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think the media, the US media in particular, has learned that lesson from 2016?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I will go back to last summer, and I think it's absolutely right. I'll say this, that the media does cover the multiple legal cases against Trump, because you are talking about 4 criminal cases with a total of 91 indictments. It's right that they cover the civil cases against Trump. It's right that they cover Trump's position on the issues. But what Trump doesn't set out a position on issues. What Trump does is he goes out, he insults people, he makes outrageous statements, and then he counts on taking the news cycle. To give you the current example, I think it is right that the media do note that Donald Trump just said that immigrants, and I say this as an immigrant to the UK, but he says that immigrants to the US are poisoning the blood of the US, which is a phrase which is associated with Nazi Germany in the 30s. It's right to cover that, but you then also need to cover immigration as an issue, and you need to cover it sensibly and reliably, rather than in the hysterical terms that's set out by someone like Trump, where it's only his words that will get the attention.
You look at the polls, and I know polls, a lot can change and they can be wrong, but Trump seems to be so much further ahead than any of the Republican candidates. Do you think there is any chance that anyone, Nikki Haley or indeed any of the other candidates, can turn that around?
And you've just illustrated the danger that we've been talking about. Because when you start off with the premise that Donald Trump is so far ahead in the polls, you set the terms of what's talking about, which is, well, gosh, there really isn't a race here. Now, I can start with you on the factual basis, which is that Trump has a fairly good lead, in fact, a significant lead in Iowa, which is the first caucus. But let's say that Nikki Haley happened to run a very strong second in the New Hampshire primary, which is what we're looking at right now. Then the next state that comes up in the Republican side is South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was governor. Now, if Nikki Haley then runs strongly in South Carolina, her home state, then all of a sudden the media narrative could be, well, we've got a horse race here. We didn't expect that. And all of a sudden, it's no longer that Trump sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So simply starting off broadcast with, well, Trump's got a big lead in the polls, that's no more useful than saying that Joe Biden has a huge lead in the polls on the Democratic side as the incumbent president. I am a big believer that in a democracy, you start off by talking about the people who want to represent you, all the people who want to represent you. You talk about where they stand on the issues that affect you, and you don't make a projection, which is, this person is 10 lengths ahead, and you know what, we're going to stop the race before it even starts.
Are we clear on what the American electorate are looking for in a president? I know that sounds a really simplistic question,
Sure.
but, President Biden has got really low, historically low approval ratings right now. People aren't happy with him. Lots of people would like him not to run, but it looks pretty certain that he is going to run, and it's unlikely he's going to pull out at this stage. So are people just looking for anything that's different? Are they sort of harking back to Trump's time in office thinking, well, that was brilliant, we want more of that? Or are they just disappointed with other candidates? Or has no one grabbed it yet? I mean, is there a sense of what people are looking for?
No, I'll preface this by saying that Biden's approval rating is about the same as Trump's was in 2020, and it is lower than Obama in 2012 when he ran. But it's not like Joe Biden, in fact, is despised by everyone. The second thing I'd say to you is that what Americans want is they want to have roofs over their heads. They want to have jobs. They want to have decent health care where if they get sick, they won't be turned away at hospitals. They want to have a reliable system of government where the courts work, where the legislatures work. They want what we want here in the United Kingdom. The problem here is that a lot of the media now not only give the attention to personality, especially Trump's personality, they don't even report the news on the issues properly. The United States has a growth of 5% in GDP right now. Compare that with the UK, where the growth in GDP is 0%. Inflation has dropped almost month on month for more than a year, to where it's one of the lowest rates of inflation amongst the G7 and indeed the G20 economies. But the media don't tend to report those economic statistics. They tend to actually report scare stories, especially the right-wing media, which says, oh my gosh, this is it. Joe Biden has led America to hell in a handbasket. I'm not saying you don't report the bad news about America as well. America has got serious issues to address on gun control, on immigration. It's got a serious issue to talk about in terms of health care, even though the situation is better than it was a decade ago. But what I'm saying here is that you're not getting reliable information on precisely those issues that do concern Americans. Because if you did mention them, perhaps we change the whole tone of the campaign in a way that we didn't see in 2016.
I was in the States last week on holiday, and I was talking to lots of Uber drivers and people working in restaurants and all around. And the thing that loads of people were talking to me about, the big worry for them, is cost of living. And they were saying that since the pandemic, everything just costs so much more. People were having to work second jobs or third jobs, that life was really tough. Donald Trump, before he was elected last time, was giving very much a message of hope and of change. Is he able to do that again? Is he able to tap into that it's expensive now, you're struggling now, I can give something different? Are the other Republican candidates doing that as well?
Well, a slight correction. Donald Trump's message wasn't really one of hope in 2016. You might remember that.
Well, he said make America great again. He would argue it was hope.
Well, those four words is a slogan. But if you go back to what he actually said in his first inaugural in 2017, he spoke about American carnage. His actual message was that America was actually in this completely destroyed state, and there was very little about what he would do to bring it out of it. That was the problem, I think, with a lot of the Trump years, is that it was portraying America and himself as a victim, rather than trying to say, right, how are we going to work together to make it better? Which is why Joe Biden's inaugural was based around unity, a very, very different thing. Be that as it may, again, when you talk about what Americans are feeling, and you have to respect what they're feeling, those anecdotal stories actually don't fit the broader picture of what has happened in America, especially since 2021. Remember that America not only was coming out of the recession of 2012, it was coming out of the Trump years, which were very unstable in terms of economic policy, except for the very wealthy who got tax cuts. And then it was coming out of the pandemic. So people, quite rightly, in 2021, given the fact that America is suffering the highest level of unemployment that it had since the 1930s, are thinking this isn't going well here. But since 2021, the cost of living has actually come down compared to where it was in the Trump years. Unemployment has come down to one of its lowest levels since 1945. Now, there are still problems in terms of that a lot of the jobs are still part-time jobs. A lot of the jobs are not necessarily the full-time jobs that you want. But this idea that America is economically worse off, what happens is the media says, well, so-and-so from New Hampshire said this, so-and-so from Iowa said this, which they should say. But then they don't look at the broader picture where a lot of people are saying, you know what? Things were really, really rough in the pandemic. And no, it's not as bad as it was when we suffered one of the biggest economic downturns in American history.
Just before I let you go, can you just lay out for us the kind of important timeline of events starting from January and the moments that could be significant in the lead up to the election?
So January 15th is the Iowa caucuses. Those are like town hall meetings. They're not like going to the ballot box. And in those town hall meetings, people decide who they want to choose on the Republican Democratic side. Then for the Republicans, you have the primary in New Hampshire on the 23rd of January. And that's the first vote, the first test of a vote, where you have to say, let's look at Trump, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie. How have they fared? Then you go to South Carolina in February. That's the next contest. There are a few more contests in February. And then you have that group, that group of 8, 9, 10 primaries on what's called Super Tuesday, which is the first Tuesday in March. And usually, not always, Super Tuesday is the defining moment in terms of who's going to win the primary.
Really interesting to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.